Hello and welcome back to the SecurityMetrics podcast. I'm Jen Stone. I'm one of the principal security analysts here at SecurityMetrics. And with me today, I have, once again, we've had him on the show before and he was great. If you missed it, go back and find it. Heff, Matthew Heffelfinger, and we call you Heff. Yeah, I know, right?
That's a long name.
I'm telling you, that is a long name. Has got a lot of experience and knowledge, and I just wanted to share that with you so you'd kind of know where he was coming from before we launch into our conversation. So Heff is the director of SIEM operations for SecurityMetrics. He's been a cybersecurity practitioner for over 15 years in a variety of cyber areas, including security operations, cyber governance, security training, awareness, and many others. Not only at SecurityMetrics, but throughout the cyber community. He's colloquially known as Heff, currently based in the heart of the Silicon Slopes region of Utah, where he leads the Security Operations Center, composed of threat hunters who support a variety of industries, including healthcare, retail, banking, you name it. They've got it going on over there. Additionally, Heff co-hosts a bi-weekly cybersecurity newscast for SecurityMetrics. We'll get into that a little bit more in a minute, but previous cybersecurity stops include General Electric, NBC Television, TJ Maxx, as well as Las Vegas Sands Corporation. You know, Vegas always sounds fun to people who don't live there. I just want to point that out. His education includes Cornell, Villanova, Pepperdine, and DeVry University. He holds a variety of certifications, including GST-RT, CIRP. You know what? There's a lot of letters here. I'm going to let you guys look him up on LinkedIn or wherever.
Too many
because you apparently got all of the security certifications. Very active in the community, serving on advisory boards for UNLV and Southern Utah University. Actively coaches and mentors cyber patriot clubs throughout the United States. And most recently became a co-founder of the International Museum of Technology in Las Vegas, Nevada. That's super cool.
A lot of work.
So look, tons of speaking engagement history. I'm not going to go over that. What I do want to mention, though, because it's still ongoing, is your news podcast. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, we tried to walk in your footsteps, in your shadow, and try to start a podcast and a newscast. And you can check us out on YouTube. Please subscribe.
Yeah, you're doing better than I am, buddy.
I promised the audience, I said if we hit 5,000 subscribers, that I would whip out my Chris Farley impersonation. So the more subscribers we get, the closer we can get to becoming Chris Farley.
Worth it. Yeah, let's do that. Go subscribe to him. Also, if you're not subscribed to us, you should totally be subscribed here. We have some great conversations. So today, our conversation is choosing a managed service security service provider. I think I messed up the name, but you know what I'm talking about.
This is a doozy.
So first of all, what is managed security?
But you know, Jen, if you talk to 100 different people, you'll get literally 100 different answers. I would try to say it's about trusting your business to someone else, trusting your crown jewels, and some people would call it outsourcing.
Yeah.
And hiring someone that maybe has just a little bit more subject matter expertise in a particular topic or area of security. And cybersecurity and IT security, it's like a mile wide, inch deep, and we all specialize. We're all kind of like doctors or lawyers. We specialize in one particular
narrow
domain, and we really know that domain. But then you find these different providers out there that can specialize in those areas and then help you fill the gaps.
Right. And a lot of times organizations are surprised that their IT guy doesn't have all the knowledge to be a security guy as well. Like it seems to be a little bit opaque to them understanding the different, not just the knowledge, but also the perspective that you need to have, not to make things run, but to make things run securely. What do you look at? How do you verify? And it's often beyond a small or even medium business to have enough personnel with enough expertise in-house.
Yeah.
So tell me, I've heard a couple of different, I've heard MSP versus MDR. Can you go into a little bit like different types of managed security?
Sure. So I should stress that MDR is managed detection and response services. And then you have this concept of MSP or managed security providers. So in those two realms, those two pathways, you have different topics that need to be taken care of within your business. So it might be a managed security provider that specializes in PCI compliance or GDPR compliance or HIPAA compliance. Run out of breath trying to say all those names. But then you also have pen testers, and maybe you need forensic services. You got all these areas. So that really covers the gamut of the MSP world. And then you have this MDR world, which is really where my wheelhouse is, looking for the bad guys, looking for the threats, providing services back to all these businesses and organizations trying to find the bad guys. And that is really where you have that subject matter expertise. Because you've seen the news. I mean, our audience has seen the news. How crazy is it?
Yeah.
I mean, all these threats and bad guys, and knowing all their tactics, all their techniques, all their procedures.
Right.
It's a monumental amount of knowledge that you have to keep up here. And then to be able to kind of proactively find it for the client.
Right.
That's the challenge part. And a lot of the clients, they may not have time to go out there and find all the bad guys and find all the holes and patch all the holes and all that kind of stuff. So that's where we come into play, MDR versus MSP.
Excellent. And do you know, another thing that I find with customers that I work with is they hear all of these things in the news, and they'll do one of two things: either just panic and try and do everything when really they only need a certain subset of security controls, or it becomes so overwhelming. And this is actually, with smaller groups, the most common thing I see. They don't do anything.
Yeah.
Like it feels
terrible.
like, it's a paralyzing thing because there's so much out there. Well, I'm just going to get popped anyway. We're just going to somebody's going to breach us and we're just going to have to deal with it. Or, no, we're fine and I don't want to actually look under the covers, right? So
nothing to see here, folks. Move along, move along. Keep it moving, folks.
Right. So I think that is one reason why it makes sense to get somebody who specializes in it to hire them, right? So that might be one reason why is paralysis at an organization, lack of knowledge at an organization. What are some other reasons why a group might decide to outsource this?
A lot of it would be the financial aspect. A lot of people have this perception that hiring an MSP or MDR is super expensive, and the prices have just dropped so tremendously in the last decade that being able to find a subject matter expert that can do it within your budget is absolutely reasonable in this day and age.
Right.
But 10 years ago, I would not have said that. I would have said the tools are too expensive, and finding the expertise and these threat hunters out there, hiring them. But now we're in this budget conscious era where you can find the right value for your business.
And also we've learned how to do it better. So tools are more unified, procedures are more unified. So there's ways that groups can take in the information and give back the knowledge that organizations need in a way that really is price conscious.
Yeah. Another reason I would say too is bad experiences. You go out, you hire an MSP, and they don't deliver on your expectations. So then you have this gap, and you're thinking, if I go out and do this again and they disappoint me or fail me, you know what? I'm going to be the one embarrassed as the business owner or the IT manager, and I just can't afford that. That embarrassment.
Do you know where I've seen that as well? Is that they thought they were getting a managed service provider or some type of security management. And what they really were getting was IT operational management. So IT operations group that might do your antivirus for you, might even do your patching for you, but that's the extent of it. And then they thought, oh well, somebody's taking care of my security, because they didn't know that there was more to it. And even the group that they hired might not know that there's more to it.
Oh, big time, yeah.
So that's actually fairly common. So, all right. So if we've thought we need to hire someone, we need to get better arms around our security. We can't hire in-house. We just don't have the capacity for that in the organization. How do you go about choosing? How do you choose an MSP versus an MDR? How do you know what you even need?
Yes, and we could probably spend a couple days just talking about this, but I always tell everyone, start with the business and try to remove your personal bias from the equation, because you may perceive it as the owner saying, we need to buy this service, or we need this we need to get PCI compliant, right?
Right.
And then you don't realize that there's other things that may be on your docket that may be more pressing or more important. So I always recommend starting with the needs of the business, figuring out what exactly is the needs. Not every business has the cyber expertise or the workforce to try to resolve it. Because keep in mind, from an expectation perspective, you're going to hire an MSP or an MDR, and they're going to find stuff. They're going to go out and they're going to find stuff, that vulnerabilities and risks and threats. And you still have to have the staff to kind of come in there and figure out how to solve whatever the problem is.
They're going to create homework.
Yeah, a lot of homework.
Yeah, a lot of homework every time. One place where I see this really commonly and brings it home to me is, so as an assessor, one of the things I do is Pci Compliance. And a lot of our listeners have to deal with Pci Compliance. That's credit card security, right?
Sure, right.
And so there is, depending on the volume of transactions, you can either self-sign, self-attest that you're keeping things secure, or you reach a tipping point and then you have to bring a third party in. Yeah. And so the first time an organization brings in a third party to look at what they thought was good, because they've been attesting every year, yes, our security is good. The first time they bring a third party in, suddenly they have tons of homework of things that they weren't even aware existed, right?
Right.
And so whether there's a compliance need or whether it's simply, I want another set of eyes to tell me, there's going to be a gap there, because organizations are very ill-equipped to really take a good look at what they're doing themselves.
Yeah, and that kind of gets back to, you got to figure out what the needs of the business are. And you always start with that question, and then you can kind of branch away and dive into specifically, what do we need to focus on? Do we need to have the MDR help, or MSP reduce the attack surface? Or do we need to focus on business continuity? Or are we concerned about availability and 24/7 by 365 coverage of our entire business? I mean, figuring out those essential questions, there's a lot of those questions. Yeah. What do you ask? And we can get to that in a little bit here, but yeah, you got to nail that down. Why are we doing this? Is it for the better of the business, or is there a personal bias that you have in mind?
Right.
Which is why you're trying to pull this off. So.
Yeah, and a lot of times it is spurred by compliance, which is fine. Whatever. Honestly, I don't care what the spur is, as long as people take security more seriously.
That'd be great.
And yeah, so if it's just, you get it and you want to go do better, or whether it's somebody else telling you got to go do better, either way, we get there in the end.
But but I got to tell you though, from a needs of the business perspective, if you don't know what the threats are that are hitting your business, then it's going to be really hard to try to figure out, do I need an MSP? Do I need an MDR? Is it social engineering that's hitting your business? Or is it denial of service attacks? Or are we seeing more ransomware type things? I mean, not knowing those answers makes it really hard to kind of proceed forward on this pathway.
Does the business need to know those things before they reach out and start trying to engage with someone?
Boy, all that information helps. But if you don't have it, that's, again, where an MDR or MSP could come in and say, hey, let's try to figure out, are we being hit with nation state attacks? Are we seeing just these run-of-the-mill cyber criminals hitting us? Or is it insider threats? Do we have a lot of disgruntled employees that we don't know about? Answering those kind of questions really helps define what it is you want to get out of that relationship with your MSP.
So once you've decided you want to go engage someone, how do you compare them? Like, what's a fair...
Jen, you had to ask this question? Really?
Tell me how to choose. I need to know how to choose.
We are lucky. I've probably done now about 100 of these contracts for MSPs and MDRs. And the challenge you always have is asking the right questions. And you could ask 1,000 questions and get 1,000 different answers. So I put together a little checklist. You'll find that checklist as part of the white paper that comes with this. But I have to tell you that asking the right questions is the challenge. And you can always start at the very top with looking at the company itself that you want to hire. And you look at things like, where are they located at? Is their location a good match for you? If they're in this time zone and you're in another time zone completely far over, and their hours are closed when you need to get somebody on the call, that could be a very bad thing.
Right.
So I also look at the company, is their experience, their culture. I mean, you look at somebody like SecurityMetrics and how long they've been in business, and we're this full service MDR. We're a full service MSP where we have every domain of cyber all under one roof, one-stop shop, soup to nuts. You get everything, right? So you got to look at that. You have to look at that background and getting comfortable. Some companies have their sales guys masquerading as IT and cyber people.
Yeah.
And some people, the reverse. Some people, as their cyber and IT people, are actually salespeople and they know their stuff. So you have to look at that. But there's so many questions here, and we can go a mile wide and inch deep. And I would even say things like breach notification laws. I mean, do you know that, I mean, a lot of people don't know this, Jen, but every state now pretty much has a breach notification law.
Right.
And if you don't have people on your team, the MSP that you hire, that knows what's the breach notification law for the state that you're doing business in, whew, yeah, it could be an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely. So in other words, the more you know about your business and the needs of your business, the better you're going to be able to communicate with whoever you're looking at to potentially be your, service provider. But if you don't know, they might be a good resource to help you figure out what are those business needs, to figure out how to engage properly and with them.
You can even ask the question, and this is the great question. If you don't know where to start, look at what things are you trying, what are the problems you're trying to solve? And then when you get back to interviewing the MSPs and the MDRs and you're saying, hey, tell me about similar experiences your company has had solving this specific problem. And hey, can I talk to some of your clients that have dealt with this and how you solved it working together? That kind of relationship building is critical when you're looking at choosing.
Oh, for sure. Because you want to know that the group that you're working with actually understands your environment and your business.
Yeah. And your industry.
And your industry. And because there could be considerations that so many times we talk about the balance between business needs and
growth.
Security. How do you facilitate business growth, forward movement, the ability for them to actually function as a business while refraining from some of the practices that are insecure.
Right.
How do you do that in a frictionless a way as possible? If you don't know enough about their business or their industry or the needs, the security needs that are put on them from various places, how are you going to answer that question?
Yeah, and that's we get that a lot from our clients where they'll say, you are handling the e-commerce industry, or you're doing MDR services for the retail sector, or you're doing it for the aviation sector, and all the threats that hit these different industries are completely different. So you have to really choose your MSP and MDR correctly, because you could end up with, well, you don't have any experience in the retail sector. Right. You have zero experience with banking threats, and I hired you. I may have made a bad decision. So that's where asking a lot of the questions about the background of the company and similar experiences.
Sure,
that comes into help.
What about environment? Does being in a different environment? So what if you have a company that's in AWS versus Azure versus on-prem versus does the technology that they have affect the choice of a service provider?
Absolutely. And then you have to figure in not just the technology part of it, but understanding their security stance and their security posture and getting insights into their ability to resolve their problems based on your environment is a difficult question, because not all MSPs are going to share that kind of information. And that's where you really have to start doing your homework and your due diligence and asking all those types of questions up front and trying to get those answers.
So what about the risk appetite of the organization? Does that factor in as well?
It does. I would say, you have to understand that a lot of these companies, they don't want their MSP or MDR to be the police department. But they also want to get that attack surface reduced. So trying to figure out what that is and having that right balance, that you don't go too much to the one side of the equation where the company gets locked down and nobody can access the cash registers or nobody can get things done because the MDR came in and said, no, you have to do it this way. And that's not the right approach either. It's a relationship. It's a partnership. And finding that partnership is something that I know I work really hard on, trying to build that deep, holistic relationship.
So I'll bet some organizations want the lockdown, the prevention, where some want the information of the detection, and finding that balance from an organization that is maybe able to deliver different approaches to different companies.
And that's a good point too, because there's these co-management options that are out there where you'll say, I want all or nothing model. That's what some MSPs will throw out there. You get all of this or you get nothing. And then there's some MSPs that will work really hand in hand with you and say, okay, I see what your environment's like. I see what tools you have. I can also understand some of your attack surface and some of the threats that are hitting you. And not only that, but you already have some people in your business that are IT savvy that I can work with. So I want to be your partner, but I don't want to replace your IT staff. And that's a key point. I'm not here to replace your IT staff. You're still going to have to figure out and fix some of these problems. But, kind of building that relationship, that co-management is a great alternative and option that you can build into your contract with your MSP.
So does flexibility create cost?
It can, and it's like the piecemealing some things together. You can reduce your costs of your contract, and there's a lot of flexibility. We could talk about that here in a minute, but when you're able to get a handle on being darn specific, and I mean really specific on what the problems of the business are, you can really tune that contract to really get some value from it.
So actually, that seems like a great thing to explore, the financial considerations, because regardless of how good the service is, everybody's got budget they need to deal with, right? So what are some of the financial considerations that any organization kind of needs to take into account?
We can deep dive on this. Jen, there are so many different options. A lot of MSPs or MDRs, they can charge you the flat fee, or they can give you minimum blocks of time. So you really need to kind of nail that down on the contract piece. You have to also understand that there's sometimes markup fees that a lot of these, the bad MDRs, the bad MSPs will bake into the contract, and they won't tell you about it. You have to really clarify up front, what are those markup fees? You also have to think about the custom fees, or if they charge you setup fees. Is it per device? Is it per sensor? Is it per collector? Is it per endpoint? I mean, knowing those kind of questions, getting that nailed down on paper will really help avoid extra add-on costs at the end. Sometimes these MSPs, I've seen them where they charge a fee for every help desk ticket submitted. Can you believe that? So you have 20 help desk. You can't control that sometimes.
No. Yeah.
So you have to be on top of that. I've seen MSPs that will try to charge you for every phone call you make. I mean, nickel and diming any chance they get. And then of course the contract lengths. If you get into a contract and you're unhappy, you have to make sure that you bake in language in there that allows you to get out of that contract.
Right.
So, and especially when they charge you for ending the contract early.
Yeah.
How dare they, right?
I hate that.
That is the worst. There's so much of bad MSPs out there. And when I feel like I've been abused for so long being with so many bad MDRs and bad MSPs that I kind of know like all the bad things to look for. Like, don't sign this contract because they're going to do this to you or they're going to hurt you this way.
I'll be honest. I am uncomfortable with talking about money and talking about contracts. And I know a lot of people are. These are the points where people go, well, I have to know it. And it's a good idea to know it. But it feels uncomfortable talking about it, right? So one of the kind of Easter eggs that you dropped just a minute ago was the white paper that goes along with this.
And we put all these questions in the white paper.
Right.
To really, I have to tell you folks, if you're out there and you read a bunch of white papers on how to select your MSP or MDR, they're not as thorough as the one that I believe that we passionately put together to really dial in and not have you get screwed over by picking the wrong MDR.
And I felt very honored. You actually asked me to review it and help with the writing of it. And I was like, is this a textbook or a white paper? But the one part that I really valued was, here are the questions to ask about contracts and about money, because I want to be able to.
Nobody talks about that.
I know. I don't want to get on a phone and be like, I'm so anxious. I don't know how to talk about this. But then all of a sudden I have my script and I can go, hello, I need to know this information about this cost. And it's written out for you. And I really appreciate that. Then a lot of people out there going, what is wrong with you? Yeah, I can ask money questions all day, but some of us can't. Some of us really struggle with what is the contract and what is the money? And
you don't know what you don't know.
And
so if you don't ask those questions, you're going to get screwed over. And that's the last thing you need at this point. You're trusting your business.
Yeah.
You're trusting your company to somebody else, your crown jewels of your company. And to be able to do that, you have to ask those kind of questions. So I hope you'll find that in the white paper very valuable.
Look, I was raised by a very proper Southern lady. We do not speak about finances.
Wow.
I'm telling you, that's probably where it came from. Sorry, that was probably more insight than everybody needs to have into my life. But so So we've got this white paper out there, and we'll make sure that we have links to it. Yeah. There are questions that people can ask, and you can customize them. If you already know what you need to know, but if you want a checklist, man, that's great to have that provided for you. So
the one thing that I'm really excited about in that white paper is actually selecting your MSP or your MDR. To me, that's the more challenging part. I think most people can work themselves through the financial aspects of it. They can work themselves through asking everything based on the needs of the business.
Right.
But to actually come down and say, okay, we found 3 potential suitors, 3 potential vendors that we're going to marry for the next year or maybe 3 years.
Who gets the rose?
Who gets the rose? Yeah, it's like the Bachelorette for cybersecurity, right? I'm going to throw the rose behind me, and we're going to select an MDR or MSP. So, but that was the best part about writing this white paper, is creating a scorecard. And when you do that, you really start to do apples to oranges comparison.
Yeah.
And you go, what does the company need? What does the company find the most valuable? And then you weight those scores and weight the averages on those requirements. So we know we need this. We know we need attack surface reduction. We know phishing is our greatest issue, and we're not PCI compliant. Let's find an MDR or MSP that can help us manage some of that.
So is creating a scorecard part of that white paper? I believe it is. It's been a while since I read it. But so tell me a little bit more about how you create it. Does it have one there for you, or do you have to put your own weightings in, or how does a scorecard work?
I debated about that, and maybe that is something that we need to do, is put out a template, a scorecard template.
Yeah.
But if anyone's ever worked in the enterprise level or any of those big corporations, you know that they typically take 3 to 6 vendors that they have narrowed down their choices to, and they build a scorecard. And what they do in this scorecard is they're comparing what are we going to do that's best for the business? And we're going to place a priority on this requirement or this requirement. And then we're going to do this comparison chart and compare the top 2 or 3 vendors out there. And the business will select a couple people to, hey, make this decision. Here's the scorecard. Let's all come to an agreement. Based on the scorecard, this vendor came out on top. This vendor came out in 2nd place. And this vendor came out in 3rd place. Do we still want to go with the top scoring choice? And that's where the decisions
I don't know
get made.
which one gave me a T-shirt.
Right, the free stuff. Who gave me the swag? I'm in for it if I get the swag.
So kidding right now. Don't choose based on swag. That's a terrible
that's a bad idea.
Terrible way to. So the weighted scorecard gives you a way to look at apples to oranges, because what they're offering is going to be slightly different no matter what. It's what you said at the very beginning. 100 different providers and 100 different ways to do it. Right.
Right. And, making that decision, it's never easy. And I always find that sometimes personal bias comes into play. Like, oh, I really like the sales guy and I really like this, but they're not the best price. But so you gotta weigh those things in there. And having a scorecard, being able to see it on paper, being able to visualize it, having 2, 3, 4 other people in your company help you also make that decision, it really goes a long way so you don't get screwed in the long run. So.
Yeah, I like that idea, so that you have other people kind of checking your work. Not that you did something wrong, but it's that gut check of am I leaning towards a bias that maybe shouldn't be considered for this situation, and maybe especially if the people who are going to be involved in working with the provider need to be part of that process.
Right.
So because when you talk about you've chosen a provider, but then what happens? Onboarding that provider. Well, if you've got somebody who has to work with this new group and they're not on board, it is going to fail, and they're going to find justifications. Oh, well, not my fault. It was really bad service provider. May not have been the service provider at all. So tell me about how to create a positive onboarding experience for these.
Well, it's all about expectations. And, anytime you go into a relationship with someone or some company or some business, sometimes the expectations don't actually line up with reality.
Yeah.
Speaking from experience, okay. But yeah, I mean, you gotta understand that if the onboarding experience is sloppy, and I'm talking about the sensors aren't getting online, you're not happy because they're not responding to your calls in a timely manner, that part of the equation if that's not being met, those expectations, what do you expect after 90 days?
Yeah.
After you're already hired them and you can't get rid of them.
Yeah.
So you really have to understand the SLA part of the process, which is the contract piece. And that's the other element. So if the contract is not, how do I say this? If the contract is not identifying all of the expectations that you have, then you're going to be very unhappy. Overpromising and under-delivering. All right. It's like Domino's Pizza. They say they're going to be there in 30 minutes and they show up in 35.
And it's cold.
All right.
Every time.
That's an MSP. I've heard that so many times, you know, or flip the script. You said you're going to be there in 30 minutes and you show up in 20. Hey, now we've got ourselves a good positive relationship going on here. So back to the SLAs. You got to start working on those SLAs. And what we've done in the white paper is we try to highlight a majority of those types of questions that are going to come up in the SLA that you need to get down on paper so you don't get screwed.
And I'm sure that most of our listeners know this, but an SLA is a service level agreement.
Right.
Basically, it's contractually, what do we agree is going to happen when and to what degree of perfection?
Yeah. And you got to have those things. How do they handle the problems? What are the proposed solutions to the problems? You've got to just get those things nailed down. Timelines on responses, mean time to detection, mean time to response, all that stuff. So there's a lot. There's a lot.
So onboarding is where if you start seeing red flags, maybe is the time to, and make sure in your contract that is the time to maybe terminate and go a different direction.
Yeah, that make sure you have an out in that first 90 days.
Because your onboarding process is going to be indicative of the ongoing process.
Right. And it's in all fairness, a lot of those smaller to medium-sized businesses out there, they don't have that kind of time to sit there and say, well, I need to talk to, 5 of your current clients and stuff like that. But you can speed up that process. There's some tips and tricks that you can do to help you feel more comfortable about your decision of handing over the keys to your kingdom, your security of your company to somebody else. So, and a lot of that's covered in the paper. So.
Yeah, great. I'm stoked about that white paper. Not kidding you. It was a masterclass in the topic.
Appreciate that.
It's absolutely the most thorough thing to the point where you're going to have too much to read. If you want information, it will be there.
You know what it is, though? It's like when you make early on in your career, when you make some bad decisions and you learn from those mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, you know what? I don't want anybody else to go through the same problems that I went through. I would hate for you to experience this or that. That's why it needs to be in the paper.
So you're just evangelizing that knowledge so that other people can make good decisions based on mistakes that you made. That's pretty awesome. All right. So let's say the company grows, it changes direction. Something happens where they no longer want to be engaging this particular organization. Let's talk about offboarding. And offboarding, man, that's uncomfortable because you're ending a relationship. And the ending of relationships is hard, even in business. So tell me about offboarding one of these service providers, and how can an organization protect themselves up front during, preparing for the offboarding process?
So that is all about the data, the data ownership. And that's an area that not a lot of MSPs want to talk to you about. They don't want to say, well, what happens when the contract ends and it's time to not renew? Or, how do I get my data back? What happens to all my data once the contract ends? Does it get destroyed? What about data in transit and data at rest?
Right.
How is all that going to be handled? And what proof do you get that you actually destroyed my data now that our relationship is ending?
Yeah. Am I going to find out that you just sold it on the dark web?
Right.
Because if there's no protections in place.
Bad stuff.
Yeah.
And then you find out, 3-4 years later after your contract's ended that this company never secured your data in the first place. They never destroyed it. And it's on some unsecured AWS account in some database somewhere. So that's the kind of stuff that you get nailed down in the contract. Yeah. You really get that language tightened up so that there's no collection of behavioral data. There's no data of yours that's being used for analytics and their stuff. You got to make sure all that stuff's in your contract. So, and that protects you. I've seen some companies, these MSPs out there, these unscrupulous ones, Jen, where they'll sell the data. They'll sell your data to some other firm. And that can't happen. That's not right. So you got to have that nailed down.
Yeah, that's why they were able to offer it for such a low price.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Do you know,
Yeah.
if something's free, and I keep saying this, you are the product. So if you're choosing a service provider that offers a really cut rate price, they're making their money somewhere.
Yeah,
And
big
I'm
time.
not, and I don't want to accuse anybody of nefarious doings, but
There's that word again, nefarious.
look,
Yeah,
Do I
I
get
like
gold
it.
star
You
for
get
using
the
it?
bingo
Thank you.
card for today. You check that off on my.
thank you. So we've talked about onboarding. We've talked about offboarding. What about when they're actually in that relationship with that provider? How do they maximize that? They're paying good money for something.
Yes. So much of it is when you have these subject matter experts that you've hired. You've got an MSP or an MDR, and they have some pretty remarkable, talented staff. To be able to go out and buy that staff for your own company might be cost prohibitive,
Right.
but it's like, you know what? You have a college professor on your team now, somebody that is just going to be able to hit home runs for you. Take the time to learn from them. And you may not like everything they're going to tell you. You're like, oh, you found this vulnerability. Oh, you found another one. But realizing that they're doing it in your best interests. And our team really tries to do a lot more coaching and mentoring and teaching. So we never want to come in and talk down to the client. You never want to make them feel like they're this big because they just don't know. They don't know what they don't know. And teaching them about all these different threats and these threat actors out there and all these different tactics, techniques, and procedures these bad guys are doing, it's a real learning experience.
Yeah.
So to maximize that relationship, it's about kind of saying, hey, what can I learn from this? How can I gain value from their teaching, their coaching, their mentoring? And that's a positive, healthy relationship. When you find that, that's a good MSP. That's a good
That
MDR.
is it. I mean, that's a good any security advisor. So many times in our industry, I meet security professionals who do that behavior where they do talk down to people,
Yeah, the
where they
narcissistic,
are critical,
the nepotism.
yeah,
Yes, I
or
hate
whether
that.
they just make people feel small. And we are all white belts at something, right? This is not everybody is not an expert in every topic. And if you are truly a security professional, I believe part of that is raising security knowledge wherever you go. You know what? I'll be
Raise
on
the ship.
Yeah, raise the ship. So I'll be on an assessment, and I always ask, do you have any questions for me? And sometimes it'll be someone who is on the business side who really has nothing to do with technology, and they'll ask me, hey, do you think that this kind of a text would be a scam? Like the little things that you wouldn't expect. I love those questions because then I can educate them a little bit about something that then they won't make a bad decision for their company and create security holes, right? Yeah. And I believe that as security professionals, we should all have this attitude. Let's not look down on each other for not knowing things, but instead understand that everybody is doing a good job at their particular expertise, and then bring whatever knowledge you have to the conversation.
I always say with our team, I want all of the people that work for me to realize that it's going to be your mom and dad or your grandparents that are shopping at the clients or the businesses that are out there. And I want you to always have that in the back of your mind that you're doing this work to protect them, protect the client, protect your family, your friends.
Yeah.
So your job is much bigger than you realize. And you come down off your high horse and you just start to say, what can I do to make this business or this organization stronger and safer and more secure? And you do it with such passion and energy. It's fun.
I love that. And empathy for the people that you're working with. I think that just makes a world of difference.
But really, you know what's great, Jen, is it when you get that positive relationship going on, what you tend to find is your business's IT staff, their knowledge gets stronger. It's like getting a free training. It really is. When the relationship is tuned in and dialed in, you can then take their IT staff and make them into cybersecurity professionals,
right?
On the same level, sort of like yours. I mean, it's a really cool experience.
Yeah, for sure.
Seeing that growth.
So let's say that you already are in a relationship with MSSP, and they're not these things, that they are, like you said, they really are dragging you down, and yet you have to pay them off to get out of it. And what would you say, having been through that, what's the value in either sticking it out or changing to another organization? How would you make that decision?
Yeah, from I've been in both sides of the shoes, hiring an MSP and being dissatisfied, and then also being now on the arms dealing side of the equation, which is what I am here at SecurityMetrics, and trying to deliver on that expectation. And it's always about having that heart to heart with the client. We're realizing that we're here to stop the threats. We're here to stop the bad guys. We have to absolutely do everything in our power to get them out of your environment, get your attack surface reduced. What is it going to take to get us all on the same page? A lot of that comes down to the right leadership in place and having the right people on your team that can massage those conversations and not come in as very adversarial. And when you have that adversarial relationship, somebody in the relationship has to step up and recognize it. That, hey, we have some conflict here. Let's work through this conflict and talk through it and try to resolve it, because we're doing it for the betterment of the business, which ultimately is about protecting my family, your friends, your clients from not getting, hurt by threat actors.
Every time I think we're going to have an in-depth technical conversation on this podcast, it always ends up being about relationships. It always ends up being about communication. So yes, we use technology to secure things, but without the relationship and without the communication, we can't get to maximizing the technology.
No, we can't. It's been enlightening. I hope the audience is getting some good value out of this. There's so much to this conversation, and we're just lightly touching the iceberg here.
I know. We have pages, and when we came in here, I said we cannot do all of these pages.
Right.
But I want to give people enough information that they'll be interested in going and looking at the white paper and gathering that information more for themselves. But before we wrap up today, is there any particular topic or element of understanding that you really wanted to either deep dive into or that I haven't even touched yet that maybe you want to go over?
I think asking the right questions is the hardest part maybe about this experience. I mean, like I said, you're going to get through the financial aspect. You're going to understand some of the SLAs and your expectations that you want to see in the contract. But if you don't ask the right correct questions from the beginning, the whole process can fall apart really quickly. So you'll notice in there that there's a lot of questions in that white paper. Probably for some people, it'll be overkill. But when you're talking about trusting your business to somebody else, trusting those crown jewels, it's something that the MSP should never take lightly, and they should be honored and celebrating that they're able to defend your business from the bad guys. So.
Love it. And I liked all the questions in it. Feels like a blueprint for success, putting yourself in the right direction from the very beginning.
Good. Thank you for those kind words. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much for coming and joining and talking to the audience today about what you do and how to engage successfully for some security service provider.
Oh, excellent. And thank you for inviting me here. It's always fun coming down here and hanging out in your green room and trying the buffet. They give us free food when we come down here, so I can't turn that down.
No. We don't do any of those things. Thank you, though, for joining us once again for the SecurityMetrics podcast. I really hope that you've enjoyed it. Please check the notes. There's a lot of great information there. Check out that white paper. And if you like what you saw here, please take a minute, like, subscribe, comment, share this with other people who you know are working with some of these concepts that need to have a better understanding of security in their organization. Take care. Thanks for watching. To watch more episodes of SecurityMetrics podcast, click on the box on the left. If you prefer to listen to this podcast, it's available on all your favorite podcast platforms. See you on the slopes.